All right, so we're going to go over some limitations with vector graphics. You don't need to do anything along with this file, just watch this video just to see some things and be aware of them. So I've already gone ahead and made a series of graphics, and I'm going to go ahead and import them into After Effects. All right, so in here, everything looks pretty good. They're all raster, remember, so I'm going to go ahead and lock and shine my background. And let's take a look at this first thing. So this particular sphere, I use the gradient features. So if you go in here, you could see that I have this complex gradient set up. If you don't know how to use the gradient tool, which is this guy right there, there's some really great things you can do with it. There's video tutorials on lynda.com on how to work with gradients in Illustrator. So if it's something you're interested in, by all means, I encourage you to explore that. However, it doesn't really work in After Effects. And let me show you. So if we were going to handle this as a raster object and just leave it as it is, it would work fine. But if I needed to animate that for some reason as a vector, if I go to Create, Convert Shapes to Vector Layer, this is what you get. It can't convert those gradients yet. So maybe that'll be a feature that it has someday, but it doesn't have it right now. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those layers. All right. So the next are these three squares. So I put these three squares on one layer in After Effects, or sorry, in Illustrator, which is fine. You know, it's not a big deal. There's, you know, these three different rectangles are not that complicated. However, because they're on one layer, if I wanted to convert these to shapes, so I'll control click, create shapes from vector layer. I'll just go ahead and delete the raster. If I did this, you can see that now I have three different groups in here. So one group for each distinct path. And that's kind of okay, but like let's say I wanted to scale one of those squares. Well, if I go down to S for scale and scale it, it's going to scale all three squares uniformly. So remember last video I said each group has its own transform controls, and that's why. So if you do have a series of paths on one layer, you can animate, you know, one scale independently, but you have to pay a lot of close attention to make sure you know which scale you're on. You're on the scale for that particular group. You know, I'd probably rename this like green square or something like that, and that makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on. Or am I scaling the entire thing? So at any rate, that's why you usually want to put your objects on separate layers. It's just as easy to have these on separate layers and parent them together and then animate them just using the transform controls. So those vector contents, you really just want to animate the path, the stroke, the fill. There's times when you might want to animate the other transform properties. For instance, they have skew, which is pretty handy, and you can adjust the skew axis. But for the most part, you would handle that through filters or effects. So if you can just keep each path focused on the path, or each layer focused on one path, it makes your life a lot easier. All right, I'll go ahead and delete that. Now, here you can see I have two, I don't know why I said organ. It's almost the organ color, I guess. But I have two different organs. One of them is the fill and the stroke as separate layers, and one is just the whole thing. So let's talk about why. So in here, what I did is I went into this outline, and I'll do this on the star just so you can see what's happening. Or actually, no, I'll do it here. So you can use the path width tool in Illustrator to vary the size of different paths and, you know, vary them quite a lot and make really nuanced paths. And this is great for lots of illustration purposes. If you are not familiar with that tool, definitely get comfortable with it and play around with it. You can use it with hard angles too, so there's a lot you can do that's pretty great with this once you get used to it. But at any rate, in After Effects, what I did is I have that guy. So I'm going to go ahead and convert to shapes from vector layer, and I'll delete that one. And at first this looks fine. The thing is that stroke, because it's so pronounced, because I've modified the path of the stroke itself, is its own group. So I can work this way. However, here's the other problem. look at how detailed, how many anchor points are on that. That would be a pain in the butt to animate. So if you just need to animate the position or rotate it around or do something like that, that's fine. What you could do is you could actually copy and paste these two versions and delete group 1 from one and then delete group 2 from the other. And now it's basically 2 separate layers, and then you could parent one to the other. And that would work just fine. You know, you can work them that way. Oops, except I have to make sure I have the right one. There we go. So that works fine, but if I wanted to animate the paths of that outline, oh man, that would be a real bear. Also, keep in mind, this is actually a compound shape, so I have an interior path and an exterior path to keep track of. So if you remember solid drawing, the more vector points you have, the harder it's going to be to keep that drawing really solid, to keep it clean and professional looking. So that's kind of a pain. I don't think I'd want to do that. So what I did in Illustrator is I went ahead and expanded the shape, and then I also simplified it. So in here I have the fill, and then I also have the outline. And so in After Effects, if I were going to convert both those two shapes, and then I'll delete these guys, then you can see that if I go down to the path for that, the interior shape is just one path with 2 anchor points. And so is the other one, just 2 anchor points to make a nice circle. So the fewer anchor points you have, the easier it's going to be to animate, and the easier it's going to be to keep track of making sure that it stays true. So I could just deform this quite a lot, something like that, and as long as I have that original anchor point, it'll look really fine. So just to show you how I did that, if you can hear me over my barking dog, who's really annoying me as much as she's adorable. So here's that original logo with the outline and the fill. And what I would do is I'd go to Object, Expand Appearance. And now as an expanded appearance, if I use my direct selection tool, you can see I have my interior object, and then I also have the outline and then the fill. But then what I can do is I'll take this object and I hit Command X to cut it. I made a new layer. I'll do Edit, Paste in Place, so it goes right back in the same exact spot. I'll move that below, and I'll lock that. And then with this path, I'll go ahead and grab that whole path, and then I'm going to simplify it. So I go to Object, Path, Simplify. And if you get this first window, what you can do is you can click on the More Options, and it can show you just several different ways of viewing it. So you can kind of play around with these sliders to see, you know, what's the best combination you can get. And I think mine was like, yeah, you can't get much better than just 4 anchor points for 2 compound paths. So then once you say okay, it's gonna keep that shape. So that's basically some things that I wanted you all to know about the limitations of working with vector graphics in After Effects. So you just want to have as few anchor points as possible just to make your life easier. And whenever possible, you really want to move objects onto their own layers because it's easier to handle them as a group in After Effects by using parenting.